You're listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast. Collaboration, it's one of the most important aspects of performing music, but what is it? Wikipedia suggests that by decentralizing, teams can work collaboratively to obtain greater resources, recognition, and reward when facing competition for finite resources. So what does that even mean? Well, in other words, you're more likely to see success by working with other people than if you go it alone. My name is Kevin, and today we have a special interview for you. We're going to listen in as our very own Robert from the podcast had a chance recently to talk to David Harrington, the founder of the Kronos Quartet. And even if you're not familiar with the Grammy Award-winning quartet, it's likely you've heard their music. They've performed and recorded with rock stars, poets, movie directors, composers, and musicians from around the world, and they've released over 50 albums. David's fearless crusade to seek out new music and collaborate with artists of any genre and background seems to constantly propel Kronos forward towards new audiences and opportunities. Join us as he tells his story.
Hello, everyone. This is Robert, and I have a very special interview for you today. I have on the phone with me David Harrington, violinist and multi-instrumentalist, founder of Kronos Quartet. Welcome, David, and we're thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
The Kronos Quartet has been performing and collaborating and recording and touring all over the world for over 30 years now?
Yes, since 1973.
It seems to me that Kronos is most known for is its numerous collaborations and experiments in everything from pop to the avant-garde. And I wanted to talk today about those collaborations that you've done, but I wanted to sort of start out and just sort of ask, how did the Kronos Quartet come to be?
Well, I'll step back just a year. Before that, I was playing violin in the Victoria Symphony. And the reason I went there was, like many people my age at that time, was faced with the prospect of the draft and the Vietnam War.
Right.
I decided that I was not going to be a part of that conflict. And so I decided to get a job in Canada, and I'd signed a contract. And by the time that I went to the draft board and then got a deferment, I'd already signed the contract. So my wife and I went to Victoria for a year. And during that time, the conductor of the orchestra, Laszlo Gatti, he knew that I loved playing quartets more than any other form of music. And he called me one day and he said, I heard about this series of concerts that the Provincial Museum wants organized for them. Would you be interested in doing it? And I said, I'd love it, So basically I spent that year, in addition to playing in the Victoria Symphony, organizing concerts and, playing all kinds of music that I loved and just getting used to the idea of kind of making an ensemble work. And by the time I came back to Seattle, that's when I first heard George Crumb's Black Angels, and that was in the summer of 1973. That was a moment that I'll never forget, and it's influenced everything I've done ever since, and that is that I decided I had to play that piece immediately. Kronos started 2 or 3 weeks after I heard Black Angels, and that would have been in September of 1973. And later that season, we played Black Angels. But in terms of collaborations, I'd even have to step back further, because the first composer that I started performing and working with, first living composer, that is named Ken Benshoff. Ken Benshoff lives in Seattle. I was in a string quartet when I was a kid. We ended up playing a concert of his music. And at age 16, I got to take part in a world premiere of his piano quintet.
Oh, my gosh.
That was an absolutely thrilling experience.
I bet.
And, we worked on the piano quintet for several months, a couple times a week. And Ken invited all the members of the group to really be a part of the composition and take part in making decisions. And so I got used to making decisions about new music at the age of 16.
rather than just playing what was written on the page?
Well, and learning that what was written on the page could be played in a million different ways.
Right.
And one of the things that you need to do is come to a decision, and one decision tends to affect lots of the decisions.
Yeah.
What was amazing for me is that it was so much fun. And by the time that we played the premiere, I felt like I was going out on the stage playing my music.
Oh, that's great.
And Ken was playing piano. And so it's like I felt so empowered, and so that like every note of that, I knew that piece so well, and it was like something that I made many decisions about. After that concert, then he became my composition teacher through high school, and he's been a lifelong friend ever since. In August of 1973, I remember the morning after I heard Black Angels, I called up Ken and I said, I'm going to get a group together. Just had this amazing experience. I've got to play Black Angels. How would you like to write the first piece for the group? So Ken Benshoff started writing his first piece for Kronos before we even had a rehearsal. And later that year, we played the world premiere of Traveling Music. And if you're interested, Traveling Music is on the 25-year box set. That was the first piece ever written for Kronos. And I feel that a lot of the give and take that we've been able to have with composers from many different places in the world and many different styles and outlooks and backgrounds and religions and languages and all kinds. I think it really emanates from that relationship that started with Ken Benshoff.
Wow, that's great. Starts with a composer and a tune.
Yes.
You started to get a real feel for working with modern music, and had you sort of worked with classical primarily before that point?
The first string quartet piece that I ever played was Beethoven's Opus 127. The E-flat major quartet, and if you know that piece, and if you know the recording that I first heard, it was the Budapest Quartet back in the 60s. The performances were legendary. As a kid, I joined the Columbia Record Club. You sent in a penny, and you got to choose 5 records, as I remember. And one of the records I chose by accident, if there are such things, Opus 127 of Beethoven. Along with some of the others were, 1812 Overture with Leonard Bernstein, and, I can't remember everything else. But anyway, within those 5 LPs was Opus 127, and those opening chords are still ringing inside of me. And that was the very first piece I ever played in the string quartet repertoire, and basically I heard it, I liked it, and I wanted to try to make that sound. I think that one of the things that has been consistent over many, many years is, if there's something out there that's intriguing and beautiful and wonderful and can't figure out how did that ever happen, how was that made, and, that tends to kind of activate my curiosity, and I'll try to figure out a way to make that sound, whatever it might be. I think I'm doing the same thing right now that I did when I was 12 or 13 years old, really.
I think one of the fascinating qualities of the Kronos Quartet has done is really challenge the very nature of what a music group is and how it operates. For example, a country group, you might imagine, kind of comes at things from a certain way of doing business and producing music, and it's different for a metal band or a chamber group or an Elvis impersonator. But there seems to be certain established routes and practices that musicians will go through, and it seems like the Kronos Quartet has just sort of ignored all that and just, followed the music, I guess.
I think that's correct, because to me, the music that we play and the music that attracts us and creates a certain way of approaching it. And, it becomes part of the listening experience almost, that there are certain things that seem really natural within the world of the listening that we're doing.
And when did you sort of start mixing in pop culture and Jimi Hendrix tunes and things like that? Was there a conscious decision made? Or
No. First of all, Traveling Music by Ken Benshoff, the first piece written for us, brings together elements of American popular music.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's a song that Benshoff included in many of his earlier works called Kisses Sweeter Than Wine. You may remember that. Pete Seeger sang that song, and a number of other country singers have sung it. And that song is embedded within Traveling Music. So even from the very first, I've been really attracted to music that contains local roots. I think composers are influenced by their locality and by their environments, and how that happens is a mystery to me. I don't know any more about it today than I did when I was 12.
Right.
but I think it's something to celebrate. I mean, one way that people can define themselves is by what they like and what they choose to listen to and what attracts them.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I trust my ears totally, and it's like, so you mentioned Jimi Hendrix. I mean, he grew up in Seattle. In fact, he went to the same high school that my wife did.
Oh, really?
Garfield High School. Yeah, earlier than she did. And I remember at a certain point in the late '60s, when I was having a kind of a crisis of identity and trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do and all this, I remember hearing Hendrix's music and just thinking about the reality of it for me and the virtuosity.
If you can just get your mind together.
It just felt so vivid in a way that a lot of other music did not. And I kind of just filed that away. And then when I heard Black Angels, basically that sounded to me almost like the closest thing to Hendrix that I'd ever heard, coming from violins and a viola and a cello. So Hendrix has been a part of my thought process since the late '60s. But what happened is the way we ended up playing Purple Haze for the first time. I'll tell you the whole story, and it'll take me about a half a minute. Back in the late '70s, there was this fear rampant in American culture that orchestras were just going to dissolve and fade away. They were a thing of the past, and that it just was not going to be sustainable in our society. I realized that there was at least one orchestra piece I really had to play that I'd never played, and that was the Rite of Spring of Stravinsky. I just had to play that piece. By then, we've been playing for 4 or 5 years. And so anyway, I was talking to a local composer here in the San Francisco area. His name is John Geist, and John ended up making an arrangement of the Rite of Spring for Kronos and piano. And so we played that. I think it was 1979. And one day I was out thinking, well, what happens if they want an encore after the Rite of Spring? What are we going to do? At that moment, it occurred to me, it's got to be Hendrix.
That's awesome.
And the only piece I could think of that would do it for me was Purple Haze.
And it seems like there's just this amazing rap sheet of artists that you've collaborated with over the years. Is that, I mean, you said from the beginning that was sort of part of your process. I mean, how has that been? Have you found that, certain difficulties working with other artists that have sort of other visions, or have you found that you sort of have a knack for working with other artists?
Well, what generally happens is that the composers that write for us, whether it's Terry Riley or Henryk Goretzky, the composer comes into the rehearsal, or we go to their home, or every instance is a little bit different. But normally what happens is the conversation begins to be about the piece and the idea and how we can best actualize whatever idea there is. I think that one of the things that Kronos does is and that I always do, is I always think of myself as a listener.
Yeah.
Okay, what's it going to be like for me to listen to whatever we're trying to do?
Uh-huh.
And I want to be sure that I really dig whatever it is,
Right.
Because the thing is that life is short. There is a lot of music in the world, and there's every reason to do work that you find incredibly gripping and exciting and wonderful. And so along the way, if you're thinking about like other performers, we've had the good fortune to perform with some really inspiring people that have, whether it's Astor Piazzolla or Wu Man, the great Chinese bebop player, or Tanya Tagaq, the Inuit throat singer from northern Canada, or Dawn Upshaw, or Asha Bosley, and we've got some collaborations coming up I just can't wait to be a part of. And in fact, we have Rahayu Supangga coming from Indonesia tomorrow.
Wow.
And he's one of the great musicians that I've ever heard. Recently we were performing with Tom Waits. There's something that unites all of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting to think about. And it's this inner sense of music, and that music stirs something inside and awakens something, and it's incredible to be able to be a part of this. It's really thrilling for me.
That's great. I mean, that's great after 30 plus years. Well, I guess probably from the very beginning, that you still have that feeling of excitement and magic for it.
Yeah, that's I can't wait.
That's really cool. Now, so you were talking a little bit about giving the piece or the song, well, this is my own words, but giving it sort of primacy. Would you say that, like, as far as your collaborations go?
Well, I guess what I was trying to say was, as much as possible, trying to take the kind of the collective ego out of it and let the music speak for itself.
Right.
And, find a way in the rehearsal that, we're not putting anyone down, but trying to lift everybody up. It is interesting how music and the making of music is related to inspiration. Recently I was able to hear some of Martin Luther King's speeches on television. I mean, what a voice.
Yeah.
What a voice. And not only that, the thoughts, the March on Washington and that great speech. What a fantastic musician, And I remember another fantastic musician. Shortly after the album Pieces of Africa came out, we were playing in New York, and Dumasani Matairi, the great musician from Zimbabwe, was leading teaching our audience at Lincoln Center how to sing Kutambarara, which is, if you have the Pieces of Africa album, it's the last song on that album.
Uh-huh.
And who was in the front row but Allen Ginsberg?
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of looked down and I thought, that's Allen Ginsberg. I can't believe it, And he was singing louder than anybody else, And anyway, after the show, I met up with him, and at that point, we had been invited to do our Carnegie Hall debut. I was trying to think, this is an opportunity that only happens once in your career as an American musician to, to do that. And I felt this was 1993, I think. And I felt that there's a certain responsibility I feel I want to make this concert like something. So when I was talking to Allen Ginsberg, it suddenly occurred to me, you know what? I want to do Howl with Allen Ginsberg, because I don't know if you have ever heard any of the recordings of him.
I have, yeah.
It's unbelievable. He's like a great saxophone player or something.
To the starry dynamo and the machinery of night.
I've been hearing those since the 60s. And here I had the chance to ask him, and you know what? He said yes. So in 1994, in fact, I remember the date, January 20th, 1994, we did Howl at Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
And Allen had never been there before. That was the first, maybe the only time he ever went to Carnegie Hall. And that was the first time we played there. I'll never forget the feeling of doing Howl in that place. We didn't get asked back for about 10 years. I think they hadn't heard some of the words that exist in that poem, or they thought that Carnegie Hall was a little too precious for certain thoughts or something. But anyway, for me, that was a really important moment in my life. But I don't know if I'm answering your questions about actually collaborating, and it might be a good idea to talk about our relationship with Terry. We met Terry Riley in 1978 when we had a job at Mills College as artist in residence there, and he was teaching there. And interestingly, he came to a rehearsal, and we were rehearsing Ken Benshoff's traveling music.
Right.
Well, Terry had gone to school with Ken Benshoff and had lost touch with him. And so in that one rehearsal, he kind of reconnected with the music of Ken Benshoff, and he met Kronos. At that point, he was not writing music, not notating music. He was playing music and improvising music. And it took many phone calls and letters and, conversations. But after 6 months or so, if it was his will against mine, I think in that case I won that one, because he wrote some pieces for us, and we started working with him. That relationship has been really a beautiful personal relationship, number one, and number two, I think our work with Terry Riley has expanded the scope and the sound of our music in ways that I can't even calculate, really. For example, I remember even the rehearsal when I felt the sound of Kronos change in a certain way, and it's when it was one specific moment when you could feel us all hearing something and believing it in a new way, and it was on a piece called The Wheel that Terry Riley had written for us, and he'd always wanted it non-vibrato. And at that point, we'd all kind of grown up thinking that vibrato was the most. Do you know what I mean? Vibrato. It's altering the pitch with the hand in a kind of shaking. Really, is vibrating. But what Terry wanted was a sound that it was incredibly expressive, but didn't use vibrato to alter the pitch. And I just remember the moment when I could feel the whole group hear into that sound in a new way. Basically, I think that really added a whole new dimension to our sound world. He's written, I think, 22 pieces for Kronos since 1979. The most recent one is The Cusp of Magic. And then when he was about to turn 70 years old, we decided that what made him the happiest was writing new pieces. So we decided to commission him to write us a new piece for his birthday. So keep him busy,
Yeah.
And we just thought that it would be great to have a quintet with Wumon, and so the recording that'll be out on the 5th of February is The Cusp of Magic, and that's the result of these friendships and collaborations.
Do you seek out most of the people that you collaborate with through? I remember reading somewhere that, God, it was an interview where you're talking about having all these CDs lied out on the hotel bed that you would listen to.
Oh, right.
So you must get lots of submissions, and do you listen to a lot of that yourself?
I always listen to everything.
Okay.
That's what I do. I've been doing that since I was a kid.
So, I mean, is that how it sometimes happens? Someone sends you some music?
It definitely happens that way. In fact, another piece we were rehearsing today was from another work that will be premiering on February 22nd. It's called Hold Me, Neighbor, in This Storm. It's music of Alexandra Vribalov, and she's from Serbia originally. But I first met her in 1995 when she was a student at the conservatory here in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
She called up one day and said, I have a new string quartet. Could I bring a score and a recording? And I said, sure. And so, a few days later we were having coffee, and since then she's written 3 pieces for us.
Wow.
And this new one is definitely her breakthrough piece. There's a certain vividness to it, and I think acceptance of her self and her musical world and background, and she's just putting all of her knowledge into this work, and it's fantastic.
Wow, that's great. I don't know of any other group that has sort of crossed musical boundaries as much, or genres as much as you have. And I guess that from listening to you talk, I guess that comes a lot of from sort of a disregard or almost a disbelief that they exist.
Well, I guess I don't believe, when I walk into a record store or I go into any musical environment, I just don't believe that categories truly exist. I think they're figments of imagination and marketing, and the desire to define something and give it a verbal description seems to be a part of human nature.
Yeah.
In a way. But it's not necessarily part of reality or how we really hear things and how music really works. I mean, for me, this is something I think about every day, and if you talk to me tomorrow, I'd probably have a different thought about it. But it seems to me that there's not a fence that exists around your ears and that only lets in, let's say, if you've grown up listening to only Mozart and Beethoven and Schubert and all that. Your ears don't work that way. If you walk down the street in Shanghai, you're going to hear different sounds than that. And if you're in Mexico City, you don't know what you might hear next. If you're in San Francisco, you can go into the Ethiopian restaurant around the corner from our office, and you can hear Ethiopian music. And you go to the Japanese restaurant, you can hear Japanese music. And there's no way to prevent that or control it. And in fact, that's one of the great things about music is nobody can control it, really. And nobody owns it either.
Yeah.
It's something that we're able to share with each other. What I like to share are those kind of indelible experiences that I just can't even imagine how they came into being, and I just wouldn't feel right if I didn't be a part of. And those are the kind of things I want to share. And so I'm trying to keep my ears open 24 hours a day to try to find those kinds of experiences. And sometimes it's a composer's work. Sometimes it's a performer's work. Sometimes it's a sense that a composer might write their next greatest piece a month from now. Sometimes you get a sense about somebody and about where they're at in their life and in their work. And, you need to take a lot of chances.
I think that, and this is maybe a generalization, but at least in pop music in our country, there's this sort of cult of personality that, I don't know, maybe prevents people from doing as much collaboration as they might otherwise, this sort of static idea of the rock star, rap star, that it seems like what you've done, rather than trying to put one idea up on stage is just sort of put music on stage, I guess.
Thank you. I think of that as a compliment. I really appreciate that. And actually, I think you're right. At least that's our intent. For me, music exists in so many ways and so many places and can be celebrated in so many forms. I think of a concert as an opportunity to celebrate creativity and celebrate sound and, what it can bring to us as listeners. The knowledge that we can gain from musical experiences. To me, that's something to really celebrate. And, that we're involved in a communal experience that is more than any of us. And I like to think of music as a violinist, I think of it as the result of friction. The bow hair against and the rosin pulled across the string.
Uh-huh.
When I step back and think about music and its many functions in life and in the history of humanity, you think, well, it has to be something about friction. And, one way we can think of it is that it's kind of the result of the friction between our lives and the world, perhaps. And one of the greatest things about music is that none of us own it at all.
Yeah.
And, we each can take part in it. And our world that each of us, the inner musical world that each of us has, is totally personal. And there's no two people that enter the world of music in the same place or in the same way. And their musical memories are totally their own.
Yeah.
And so it's this private world that each of us has, I think. I just love it more every day,
That's great. That's awesome to hear.
I've been listening to and absolutely love the album and collaboration you did with the Bollywood singer Asha Bhosle.
Well, we wanted to, make an album that celebrated music and life. For me, R.D. Burman is, just as an orchestrator, is one of the great orchestrators.
Mm-hmm.
That's all there is to it. He's on the same level as, Stravinsky or Debussy or Duke Ellington or anybody that you could think of that is a great orchestrator. As a melody writer, he's as good as Schubert or Beatles or whoever, that you can think of that wrote great melodies, I think. And the opportunity to introduce Asha Bhosle, who nearest equivalent in American culture would be Elvis Presley, but she sold millions more records than Elvis ever could have imagined selling. And
wow.
Basically, her voice is, the voice of Bollywood
mm-hmm.
for the last 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've never been to India myself, except in my imagination, but
right.
But everybody that's ever gone there says she's just all over the place.
Wow.
There's just nobody quite like her. And anyway, the opportunity to make that album and share her voice with our audience was just too incredible to not throw ourselves into 150%.
Does it seem like there's a lot of other musicians or a lot of musicians sort of following in your footsteps as far as these sort of collaborations and delving into, so many different kinds of music?
I have to say that when I look out at the concerts that are being put on and the recordings that are being made by other artists and groups that I'm aware of,
mm-hmm.
I can definitely say that the world of music is much more exciting and thrilling in 2008 than it was in 1973. I can definitely say that. And if we've had anything to do with that, I'm proud as hell.
Yeah. Well, I guess with, something we're always talking about here is the just how the digital landscape is changing music and making things more accessible. And, people's palettes seem to be broadening just by default because there's so much available.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And so in order to make sense of what's happening, you have to get selective. Mm-hmm. And then, which is a good thing, because then what'll happen is you'll trust your what magnetizes you, and I always trust that. The magnet either works or it doesn't. It's very simple.
What would you say to maybe a musician that listens to our show that is looking to maybe get into some collaborations and use that to explore music in different ways and increase their audience or whatever their goals may be? Would you suggest that they go for something? I guess I feel like maybe what you would say is to follow your ears, but
I would definitely say that. I would also say be very careful about the advice you accept from anybody.
Yeah.
I've been very wary of advice, and so I'm very wary of giving advice.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that there is something that you can trust in your own response to music. And the world of music is vast enough that there's something that every listener, I'm convinced, every listener everywhere, there's something that will magnetize them that they just think is, it might be a note within a piece. It might be the way a certain player plays a note. It might be a moment in a piece, and you want to just listen to, you want to have it in your life. You want it to be there whenever you need it, no matter what happens to you. And basically, I'm searching for those kind of moments. And if for anyone that's starting out, I would suggest just remember those moments that you've heard in your lifetime. Try to find out what unifies them, what it is. Just think about it a little bit and just see if you can find something that a reason for what draws you to certain things, and trust that. Trust it, because it's a very, there's a certain resonance. It's like when you trying to tune up a chord and like we were doing today, working on certain intonation passages, and when you get it really in tune, it resonates. It's really beautiful when it resonates. And there's many different forms of intonation in the world. So things resonate in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure that every person experiences intonation in a personal way, too. But there are those moments that resonate more than others.
Definitely.
And for each listener, those are the moments they're like mountains,
Yeah.
Those are the mountains to believe in the most, I think. Now, I feel like I'm really lucky that I've found those moments in a lot of different places. If anything, I'm finding them in more places right now than I ever have. And so it's like the number of ideas and projects and plans, it probably has never been as great as it is right now.
Wow, that's fantastic. So how is it? It seems like there's such a stark contrast between, playing a sort of more traditional classical venue towards, like playing a rock concert. And I think I read somewhere that sometimes you would go from playing a rock concert to a more traditional classical venue. So would you actually go from playing a concert to a whole bunch of kids in rock t-shirts to a whole bunch of people in suits?
Oh, yeah, that's happened. Sure it has. But that contrast, I love. I mean, I like to learn more about our music, and taking it to places where it hasn't been before is an important learning experience. Tomorrow morning, we're playing for 700 or 800 kids. We're doing a family concert.
Oh, that's great.
And I can't wait. I can't wait. My granddaughter's going to be there.
Gosh, well, it was just absolutely wonderful talking to you.
Well, it's been great to talk to you. Yeah, and I usually say this to everybody. If you find any music that totally magnetizes you, that you think I might not know about, please let me know.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Before we go, I wanted to say a special thank you to everyone who sent us your feedback about the possibility of us doing some music podcasts. So if you didn't hear the last episode, we're thinking about doing some just straight music podcasts, music from CD Baby and indie artists. And so it's good to get your feedback. It was an overwhelmingly positive response. So we'll get that in the works. No guarantees on when it'll happen, but we'll be working on that. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us any feedback, you can always email us at info@cdbabypodcast.com. Well, to close out things, here's a track from Kronos Quartet off their just-released album, Cusp of Magic. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.